panel is entitled Women in the KidLit Business. And we are going to be talking about women in KidLit. Like in many other professional fields, women in KidLit tend to be behind male KidLit writers in regard to money, like advances in royalties, publicity, and star power. So in this Girl Power panel, we will be talking, the KidLit women authors will be sharing their experiences and providing tips for how women in KidLit can be supported and promoted. And we have a wonderful lineup for you today. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And is everybody on yet, Haley?
You know what? And I will go ahead then and I will step off screen, Virginia. And Thank you so much. I look forward to enjoying this.
Thank you. Thank you. All right, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And I see that most folks are on, which is fabulous. So we have our Women in the KidLit Business panel. And on this panel, we have the wonderful Deborah Halverson. And Deborah, in addition to being a good friend of mine and Kathy's, she is also the award-winning author of Writing Young Adult Fiction for Dummies and Writing New Adult Fiction, as well as numerous teen novels. And she also has a books in a series for struggling readers and a picture book. She was formerly an editor at Harcourt Children's Books and is now a freelancer specializing in young adult and middle grade fiction. She also specializes in new adult fiction and picture books. Deborah has been working with authors, bestsellers, veterans, debut, and aspiring authors for 25 years. She is also the founder of the popular writer's advice site, DearEditor.com, and serves on the advisory board for the UC San Diego Extension Children's Book Writing and Illustrating Certificate Program. She also works with the National SCBWI, which is Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and we'll have a panel with our local chapter leaders later today, and is called upon for her market updates. She has a lot of expertise, so I'm really glad to have her here with us on this panel. We also have Carrie Hasler, who was here earlier with us with the story time. And she has over more than 20 years of experience in elementary education and has trained new and veteran teachers at numerous institutions, such as the University of San Diego. Carrie helped launch Blue Sneaker Press in 2015. As publisher, she oversees all aspects of the business and creative processes from book conception to completion. She manages each project's authors, illustrators, designers, and editors, while acting as a liaison between publishing partners, retail customers, and creative teams. In addition to her work in publishing at Southwestern Publishing House, she also writes educational curriculum and several children's books, including Ty the Quiet Giraffe, which she showed us earlier, Coop Squad, The Aqua Adventure, and a letter from Tashi, a snow leopard tale, and her pangolin book, which she read aloud from earlier as well. Super. And then we also have Georgeanne Irvine, who was here with us earlier as well. And she has devoted her career to raising awareness about animals and wildlife conservation. She's the director of corporate publishing for San Diego Zoo Global, where she has worked for more than 40 years. She's the author of more than 24 children's books about animals. Her passions are travel, photography, storytelling, Broadway musicals, and of course, animals. Her worldwide adventures have taken her to many of the wildest places on Earth, from the jungles of Borneo and South America to the mountains of China and the glaciers of Alaska, as well as the savannas of Africa and the outback of Australia. And we also have here with us Kathleen Krull, who has had a long career in children's books, first as an editor and now as a prominent author of biographies for young readers. The Children's Book Guild of Washington, D.C. honored her with its nonfiction award for her body of work that has contributed significantly to the quality of nonfiction for children. New this spring are Fly High, John Glenn, The Story of an American Hero, The Only Woman in the Photo, Frances Perkins, and The New Deal for America. She has a ton of books out in the world and is also a divine piano player. And I want to point out that two of the books on this slide, Sacagawea and No Truth Without Ruth, they are my absolute favorite Kathleen Krull books because she dedicated them to me. So, I think I'm the last slide, and Yeah, we'll move on. So I'm here, Virginia. I also am a children's author. I have about 300 books out in the world, and I'm currently the director of the Asian Pacific Islander Desi American Research Center at San Diego State University. And I'm thrilled to be here today working with the San Diego Writers Festival and specifically moderating this wonderful panel about KidLit women in the KidLit industry. So perhaps why don't we start with, and we can, talk about a variety of different things. I do have some guiding questions, but feel free to, I'll be calling people by name, but feel free to also jump in. And folks that are in the audience, also please feel free to ask questions. And we have our wonderful tech support, Haley and Michaela, who are going to be feeding us questions as they come up. So don't be shy. We want to make this as interactive and entertaining and informative as possible. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So my first topic, or my first question, is a statement, and then I want to hear your comments. So the statement is that KidLit is a female-dominated industry, yet like in other industries, male KidLit authors still get more attention and money. Do you agree or disagree? How so? And we'll start with Kathy. Kathy, what are your thoughts? Oh, Kathy, we have to unmute you. Or can you unmute yourself?
Mute myself.
There you go. You're good. You're good.
Okay. I'm good? Okay. Mm-hmm. I agree with your opening statement. It is a female-dominated industry. When I was first starting out years ago, it was really open to women. It's got a good thing and a bad thing about it. It's the industry is really open to women because most of the people in charge are women in kids' books. So that's where the jobs were when I was starting out, and that's how I got started. At the same time, women, because they're women, they tend to like men. And so there is, I think, a thing going on where the women tend to are overawed by their male authors and illustrators and tend to lavish more money, more praise, more awards. And I think in my experience, this is pretty much true. And it's a combination of two things. One is that misogyny runs deep in every area of our world. And then also this attitude that librarians and teachers, who are mostly women, really like men authors, especially if they're hot, which many of them are. And I've been in a lot of situations where they get so much more attention than all of the great women sitting around them, like at a panel or a convention, things like that.
Mm-hmm. What about Deborah? What do you want to add to that? What do you think?
I do. I started out in publishing 25 years ago with Harcourt Children's Books, which was located in San Diego as opposed to the publishing hub in New York. And at the time, we had the department, the children's book publishing department was almost all women. There was one male editor of maybe 16, and including support editorial assistants, maybe 20. I was hired by a woman managing editor, working under a female publisher. And I remember looking above that ranks and outside of that particular bubble and seeing men having the positions of leadership. What I have seen now, 25 years on, is a lot of those women who I directly reported to have risen up to the point where they're running the imprints, not even just imprints, but they are publishers. We've got someone in charge of Jen Loja. I worked with her in as our marketing and sales vice president. She's now running Penguin Young Readers Group. We've got Liz Becknell is head of vice president of publishing of Candlewick. We've got just Lori Benton is Scholastic Trade. So I can just keep going on. All the people that I direct reported to are now in the vice president's role. So I've seen that expanding over the years, and that's on the working side. So I was curious about what it looked like. So I actually looked up some stats real quick that I'll share with you before I hog up the time. But Publishers Weekly every year does a salary, an issue where they look at salaries within publishing. And in that you can see how many women are involved. And they said that 8 in 10 publishing employees are women. And in management, that split is about half then. It reduces to 52% majority women. So I thought that was an interesting stat. And Kathy talked about librarians. 82% of librarians are women. 75% of school teachers are women. 85% of literary agents are women. So it's definitely a women-dominated business on the work side. We know on the author side, and I'll share a little bit more about what that looks like in the reviewers and bestsellers ranks. But I thought that was some interesting stats to throw out there.
Sure. And just to piggyback off that, are you familiar with there's a hashtag Twitter movement? I can't remember what the exact hashtag is, but something, hashtag publishers paid me. Something, I don't quote me on that because I don't know the exact thing, but the idea behind that is that authors are sharing how much they made in terms of royalties and advances. And it turned out that the disparities were great between women and authors of color. What women and authors of color were getting versus what white males were getting. So that was really enlightening. I don't think it was surprising, but it was interesting. Have you heard about that?
Yes, that was a little challenging to follow because there are so many factors that go into an advance and what their advances were between whether it's the first book, their 10th book, and their sales. But what was consistently the pattern that you could consistently see was that there was a huge discrepancy in what, and the focus was very much on women of color or women of with gender diversity and racism and diversity of culture. But there's also a hashtag to look at too called KidLit Women, hashtag KidLit Women, that expands on this discussion too. So people might want to look into that one.
Great, super. And just to again piggyback off Deborah, something that you said, it's recently Dana Canada was announced as the senior VP of Simon & Schuster, which is a huge publishing company. And she's the 3rd woman and the first Black person to hold this position. Why is this significant? And maybe we'll go we'll go with you, Deborah, because you started that convo. So I want to see what your thoughts are. Why do you think that's significant?
A significant part of that, aside from the most obvious, that we're bringing in someone who can represent voices who are generally marginalized in the industry. And because that isn't the focus of this panel, I didn't look up the stats on that particularly, but that matters greatly. And what, the trickle down idea of the corporate culture. And, but what is also intriguing about that is that Dana came from outside the traditional publishing house, working at New York Times. And it shows an interest in reaching out beyond the ranks to bring in someone at that level. One of the disparity issues that was noted in that Publishers Weekly survey of salaries was that men had a longer time in the industry, maybe 20 years versus women, generally as a median being 10 years. And we know in industries when you've been in there longer, you tend to be up in the higher ranks. So that was notable as they reached outside the industry. Worth pointing out.
Great. So Kathy, Carrie, or Georgeanne, do you have any comments that you want to share about these particular issues or points?
I'm not well versed on the overall industry, but when you talk about who gets more attention, I would like to say that when we do book signings, doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, when there's a cheetah there, the animals get more attention.
Oh, man.
That's the trick. We need to get cheetahs.
Yes, and it can be a male or a female.
Yeah, that's a good point. Kathy, did you want to say something?
I think things are definitely getting better, as Deborah pointed out. And that's, all you can say is it should get better and better with more transparency, like the surveys that Deborah was talking about. I remember when I was first starting out, it was perfectly legal to pay a woman less for the same job than a man was doing. And one of the designers that I worked with in my first publishing jobs had to go to court to fight for her right to get a salary equal to the male designer who was doing exactly her same job. So things have definitely improved. There's no question about it. But I think we still have a ways to go. Um,
Because that
yeah.
pay raise difference, they're still at a $7,000 median pay raise difference with women to men.
mhm,
And what are we in 2020?
mhm.
Closing the gap, but it's still there.
It's still there, yeah. So women have to fight for what they want, fight back, maybe break a few rules. But yeah, we have a long way to go, I think.
Carrie, you had your hand up. Did you want
I
to share?
did. I think that, from a teacher's perspective, I have quite a few years of elementary education teaching, and I am so encouraged to see, especially women of color, getting into positions of leadership, because, on the other end, of the, here I am, I'm using books to teach with and to read to my students and my own children. It just, and over, the course of 20, 25 years, there's been such a great, encouraging surge of children's books that celebrate diversity. But that shouldn't be an anomaly. That should be just a norm. And I think when we have women of color in leadership positions, it just becomes a norm that this is the kind of KidLit that we put out there. And it's great because kids need to not only see mirrors, they need to be able to see themselves in books, but they also need to have windows and be able to see into other perspectives. So I think it's just, as so many of you have said, it's just when you have people in leadership that are, diverse, it brings it down all the way to that end experience of a child reading a book. And so it's encouraging.
Sure. So I love that Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop, she coined the term mirrors and windows, and that has been used often. And now we've got, the sliding doors, and, it's really, like you said, it's really important to have both representation and, reflection. So that's key. What are some of the, like when we think about, I'm just going to say the word, but we have sexism that exists, right? So when we think about that, like what are some examples of sexism that you have experienced? And if you could share some specific examples, that would be great, but you also don't have to. But what do you think are some specific examples that you've experienced, and that maybe as as future women aspiring writers move up into this field, that they should be aware of?
I don't know where to start. I have a lot of examples. Probably the worst is one publishing company that I worked for. The boss was a man, and the whole rest of the staff was women. And he would call us all into his office for a meeting, and he would call us a derogatory name, which I'm not going to share in a show the kids are watching. But that was okay at that time. This is a long time ago. There was nothing we could do about it. We felt privileged to be able to work at this particular place. It was a really awful situation. Then there've been a lot of Me Too movements that I could talk about too, where men have overstepped boundaries, have broached boundaries, been very handsy, been inappropriate. And again, I don't really want to go into details because I don't want any lawsuits. But yeah, I have a lot of stories.
So what's some advice for you, or advice from you for others wanting to get into this field, or starting out in the field in regards to combating sexism in this field?
Well, to be aware that it exists and that you're going to have to fight it. And also, do your best work, do as the best job that you could do at whatever particular position you have. There's a saying about how women have to work twice as hard to make half as much as a man, or something like that. But then the end of the sentence is, but fortunately, that's not too difficult. So just, hard work, showing up, fighting back, and just being aware of the situation, and when you need to get help from management or wherever you can go for help.
Deborah, did you want to say something? I saw that you had a comment at the tip of your tongue.
Well, I think the word awareness is the important thing. I have to admit that as a young editor, way back, I noticed things occasionally, but I didn't process them. I was in my naivete. I didn't, nothing ever happened to me. I was in a great environment in Harcourt, and just in my privileged experience, I didn't run into things personally that I was real aware of. But there are things now that as people talk about it, I look back and I realize I noticed something, but I didn't stop to process what it was. So I think there's a lot of, like that hashtag I shared about KidLit women, there's a lot of places where women are educating each other. And as Kathy said, that's what you do.
Sure. So one of the things, and why I asked Carrie and Georgeanne to be on this panel, is because, you know, one of the things that they've done is essentially start your own publishing company. And of course, you know, with a huge entity, the San Diego Zoo. So can you tell us about that, your experience starting the company and challenges? And I mean, I think the fact that it's essentially, unless, correct me if I'm wrong, but knowing you two at the head, it seems like it's an all-woman powerhouse. So tell us more about that experience.
Absolutely. Well, it is primarily women. And I would like to add that I personally have not experienced that. I can say, and I'm in kind of two fields here. When I started at the zoo 40 years ago, our keepers, who are now called wildlife care specialists, were primarily men. In fact, there were no women. And I've watched over the years as women have dominated that field as well. The head of our conservation division is a woman, our lawyers. So I've watched in my own organization women becoming, taking the head of our veterinary services is a woman. So it's really been gratifying for me to see women achieving so much within my own organization. As far as starting a book publishing division, we have a wonderful CEO who retired a few years ago, and actually retired last year. But a couple of years ago, he had this vision of creating a book publishing division. And in his mind, he felt, we've got a strong online presence, we have a magazine, we have our facilities, we're doing conservation work all over the world. Why not start publishing books? We had just celebrated our centennial, and his name is Doug Myers, and he felt that we have so many stories to share in our history that it was really important to share the stories of our history, which is mostly in the books for adults that we're doing. And then he also wanted us to tell the animal stories to kids to inspire them to love animals, care about animals, and get involved in the conservation world. So because I had written books on the side when I was in public relations and development, he came to me and he partnered me with our director of retail, who's my boss, Yvonne Miles, so two women, and he said, all right, it's up to you to start a book publishing division. And that was really it. So it's like, okay, we're going to start it from scratch. And Yvonne is a business genius. And she came up with the idea that we would partner with a custom publisher, Southwestern Publishing, who was already doing our guidebooks, and that we would partner with them. And we're San Diego Zoo Global Press. And we would work with their editors and designers, and we would create the content, and we would oversee the topics. Everything was up to us as far as the final decisions, but we would partner in creating a book publishing division. And we started in January of 2017, and by the fall of 2018, we had our first 6 books coming out. And of course, I'd written kids' books all along, so I had this vision. I specialize in the nonfiction books, so I had this vision for creating these books about real animals. And the challenges with that have always been having the photos to go with the stories. But one of our challenges as far as being a publishing entity, and we're working these out, but is actually the distribution. We sell a lot of books on site. That's our biggest audience for the books. We sell them on we sell them on Amazon, but we also want a much broader audience. So we are working hand in hand with our publishing partner to try to expand the distribution of our books, because they won awards. They're good books. I mean, Carrie's Thai book just got the top honors, you know, with the Independent Book Publishers Association. So we're on the way, but we do have challenges. We have a fabulous public relations department at the zoo, but they have a lot going on. So they haven't been able to do as much publicity on the books either, and we're working through that. But as far as the content, we are rich in content, and we have a lot of authors working on a lot of books that aren't out yet, but all but 2 of our authors have been women, I will tell you. So yes, San Diego Zoo Global Press is definitely female dominated. Carrie might be able to add to that. Carrie and I work very closely together.
Great.
Yes, I actually think that that's one of my favorite parts of my job is working with Georgeanne, and I think that I think we at Blue Sneaker Press, so we do partner with San Diego Zoo Global, and you know, we come at it with you know, bringing kind of at Blue Sneaker Press, our mission is very much in bringing books to developing books that really help to educate. Also entertain, but to really help. The education part is really critical in what we do, and so it just seemed like such a perfect match to be able to work with the San Diego Zoo and to help bring their stories to life. And really, our story is really about collaboration, I think, and I think that's a wonderful thing in any organization is to have collaboration and to feed off of each other's strengths. And I think that you know, I think maybe part of that is having a lot of women in our world. And I think that that's a strength that a lot of women have is collaboration. And I think that helps us a lot. Georgeanne is an animal expert. I have a lot of experience with kids. So when we collaborate together, it really, I think it brings out the best of both of our talents and our backgrounds. So I think that that's something that I've definitely learned. I'm fairly new into the world of publishing. And so I don't have a lot of the experience that these other panel members have of just being able to see how the industry has changed or evolved over time. But that is just a tried and true lesson, no matter what book I'm working on, whether it's with the San Diego Zoo or with another author or another organization, is that when you build a team that collaborates, where as opposed to having somebody who is kind of domineering the whole situation, it really, the end product is what is benefits the most. So that's a big lesson that I've come away with from the world of publishing.
Great. So we do have a question. We have Carrie and Georgeanne here who have essentially, you have a startup, you have an independent book publishing startup, and then we have Kathy and Deborah who have both had years of experience working in a publishing company as editors and then now as writers. But in your former lives, as you started off, you were very much enmeshed into the publishing company world. So this question is, do you think interning is still the best way to break into the publishing industry? So Deborah, you are nodding your head. Tell us more.
I was desperately trying to find.
And Deborah, could you talk? It seems that we can hear you better when you're like closer to the screen.
Right. As you were talking, I was desperately trying to find something that was announced yesterday online. Interning is a great way to get started, and more companies are opening up, more publishers are opening up internship programs, and there has been a movement within the industry to make sure they're paid internship programs. And one of the major houses, and I was looking, I couldn't find it, it was maybe Scholastic or Simon & Schuster put out a call, and they were for internships that are paid, and was quite a number of them. For people in college or just post-college, and that was a couple days ago. I'm sorry, I can't find it, but it's a great way to learn to break into publishing. Absolutely, it's the gosh, it's probably the best way.
Kathy?
Ditto, with the proviso, as Deborah mentioned, that it's a paid internship so that you're not being taken advantage of by working for free. But yeah, it's a great way to learn the business. There are or were publishing courses that you could take, like the Radcliffe publishing course. I'm actually not sure if that's still in existence.
There are a number of them that you can, if you look up publishing courses, you can find maybe 4 or 5 major ones that do feed into publishers.
That's a really great way to go too. Although you have to pay for your schooling, once you get that certificate or the degree or whatever it is, you're very valuable to a publisher, and that really increases your chances of getting a job.
Sure. I do
And
wonder. Go ahead,
I
George.
agree as well. Oh, sorry, Virginia.
No, go ahead, Georgeanne. Go.
Now, we don't have an intern within our publishing division, not yet, but we do have internship programs at the zoo, and they are paid. And any internship in any career, actually, I feel is valuable because you not only learn the business, but you have something to add to your resume. And I think internships, you know, you do a little grunt work, but I don't think they should be all that. I mean, I think you really need to get in and do the real work as well. And it does, it really gives you that experience you need. And I think someone who's had an internship versus someone who has not, you know, is ahead of the game. So I think they're very, very valuable in publishing and whatever the field may be.
And
Sure.
publishing is very much, or certainly the editorial side is very much a mentorship career. You come in with just baby skills, and the editors above you help you refine those. So it's an invaluable experience in that regard.
Sure.
And you get in and you wait for your chance to make your own mark or have your own insights or find your own authors or the next brilliant manuscript. But you have to get your foot in the door, and then you can start looking for ways to make your own contribution.
And I think this is where, you know, bringing it back to the topic of our panel, you know, this is where it's important. Like, we know how important mentorships are to women and to people of color. And so, you know, when we are, taking interns, hiring folks, et cetera, you know, it is important to have women and people of color in positions of influence, but and then also hire and encourage women and people of color to be interns in these other positions in the field. I'm wondering, like, for example, and Kathy, I'm going to come back to something that you said in the beginning. You know, I want to go back and tease this out a little bit, but I'm also wondering about, like, for example, there are things that happen, and I've experienced it and seen it, you know, like, especially at, let's say, conferences. And I know, Kathy, you and I have done several conferences together, but, you know, conferences and book signings and events, like book events. And it does seem like men get more invitations. And on top of getting more invitations, they also get paid speaker gigs. Whereas, you know, women, we tend to participate, but we're not getting paid when you have, which is fine. But when other people are, that's kind of, you know, that doesn't feel so good. But then also, I remember there's one time, and I know, Kathy, you and I have talked about it, and I've shared this at other conferences, but there was one time that we were having a conversation about who should be the keynote speaker, and somebody on the planning committee made a comment like, because I had brought up, you know, a woman that I think would be good, and then someone said, well, women aren't funny.
Oh.
And I know, I thought, because I think I'm pretty funny. So it's like, and I know women can be funny, but that was kind of the excuse to not have women as a keynote speaker, because men are perceived to be funnier. But what are some thoughts about that? Because in having done gigs and et cetera, what do you think? Kathy?
Well, I think that schools are a lot more likely to bring in male authors, for one reason being that they want to give the boys in the school a role model for liking reading and writing, and that this is a good way of living, and to encourage boys' interest in writing and reading, which is the good thing. But it gives women short shrift, because you assume that the girls are already liking reading and writing, so you don't need to provide a role model for them. And I think that's just wrong. And of course, the pay disparity is just really wrong. I think women and women are reluctant to ask for what they're worth too. I think that's another factor. In my career, I always ask for more than what I think I can get, just so I can get a level playing field. You always want to ask for more. And you might not get it, but at least you can ask for it. But you got to get yourself up there on an equal footing with men, I think.
Deborah, Carrie, or Georgeanne, do you have a response or a comment?
Again, I think we're a special case. Because I've worked at the zoo for such a long time, I haven't run across that. And I think there's something about zoo and animals. It doesn't matter if you're a man or woman, people are just interested in that. And so I personally, I know it's out there, so don't get me wrong, but for me, people are just excited to have the zoo there, wherever it is. So I haven't seen it, but I do know it's out there. So I think I'm in a little bit different situation.
Sure. Deborah, Carrie, do you want to add any comments?
I remember one panel that sparked a lot of the Me Too reckoning in publishing specifically was because there were no women represented on the panel. And that prompted folks to, as they're deciding they're getting invitations, to ask who else is on the panel. It provoked people who put together panels to reflect on what their past representation was. And that is benefiting also voices who were previously marginalized. So there is a notable discussion happening, the speed of which can be certainly debated. One of the interesting things about certainly children's publishing, I think it counts for all. I don't know so much, Georgeanne and Carrie, if that's if it'll be reflected in your side of the business, but in publishing, in children's publishing, trade publishing, it takes about 2 years for a book or longer to go through the pipeline from the time that it's acquired to the time that it's on bookstore shelves. So when we look at the representation on bookstore shelves right now and what's being published right now, those were books acquired 2 or more years ago. So I can say that one of the things I do, you mentioned earlier in the introduction that I do the market report for the SCBWI group. And I talk to people behind the scenes. I talk to dozens of agents and editors and marketing people and salespeople. And so I get a look at what's in the pipeline. And I can say that certainly this summer, the discussion has very much been about the books that are being acquired right now reflect the discussion that's happening nationally now, which is an intersection of topics. It is books for women, it is books for people of color, it is books for gender orientation and all of that. So part of this discussion doesn't end until we see 2 years from now what's coming of this particular moment. And I don't know how that plays out in the smaller independent publishing world. So that would be interesting to hear.
I also think it's important to note that, most people think children's books, that we're happy. And there's all these wonderful, magical things happening. And I just want to point out with important topics like we're talking right now, about women in the KidLit industry and about sexism, et cetera, is that it's not immune to these things that are happening. The Me Too movement and, Black Lives Matter, all of that stuff affects the children's book industry. So I want to just make sure that we note that it's not just this happy magical place. Things happen and it's complex and it's complicated. Can
I share something? I was very curious. I looked at the New York Times best-selling list today because I've seen this trend happening for a while, as I've reported each summer on the market, state of the market. And as I talk about books making their way, and in the past, I can remember the discussions that maybe said where salespeople or marketing people said we can't acquire this because we've already got a book like that. So I was curious and I went to the list, and the New York Times hardcover YA, young adult fiction list for August 2nd shows 8 of 10 best-selling books on there are women authors. And 3 of the 8 are women of color, at least to my knowledge. One of the slots going to men is authored by 2 men of color, but it's been a while now. I mean, even the Hate You Give has been by Angie Thomas, has been on that list for 177 weeks. One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus has been there 130 weeks. Yeah. So we know that it's lovely to see women's names showing up on the bestseller list, because that's where a lot of the power comes from. That's when you can start demanding money. You can start demanding representation for those around you.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I talked about the 2 years bubbling up. Look what's bubbling up.
That's a great point.
And I think that's the power of noise, right? It's the power of making some good trouble, to quote John Lewis. But that's the power of making good trouble and making noise, and, you know, putting these issues out to dry and letting people know that they exist, and then having movements around them. So these conversations are really important for that, for us to change the industry. We have to acknowledge what's happening, and, you know, do something about it. So the noise and the good trouble, I encourage people to continue to make noise and to make good trouble. And we have a question from Michaela, because she's curious. She asked, is there a piece of advice you were given that really stuck with you that you'd pass on to new writers, either specifically for women or just in general? Does anyone want to start? Does anyone have some advice? Okay, Georgeanne?
I would like to be true to yourself and write about what you're passionate about. I think, at least for me, I'm passionate about wildlife conservation and saving the animals of the world and inspiring people to do so. And I remember being told a while back that, you know, go for it. If you're passionate about something, you want to be a writer, you can do it. But I can write about things I'm not passionate about, but I'm myself. In myself, I am passionate about wildlife, and so that's what I like to focus on. It's not that I can't do other things. So I think be true to yourself and your beliefs and what interests you, and that will come across in your writing.
I can't think of an example of advice that has to do with being a woman in publishing, but the best writing advice that I know of is in the book by Anne Lamott that's called Bird by Bird. And there's lots of good writing books, how to write books out there. But that's my favorite one. She's got lots and lots of tips to keep going, bird by bird. It's fantastic.
Right. And she talks, you know, I love Anne Lamott and Bird by Bird, and she talks a lot about, you know, writing a shitty first draft.
Right.
Which is really important. And also, I'm just going to throw a plug out there, but Kathy is related to Anne Lamott. And Kathy has also touched Sean Penn and Brad Pitt, so in good ways. Deborah and Carrie, do you also have advice that you'd like to offer?
I think for me, one of the things that, a couple of things is that be prepared to work hard. Certainly for me, when for 3 years, I worked 2 jobs. I was a teacher and I started the publishing company, and it was very hard to finally be able to make that transition. And I think whether you're breaking into the publishing industry or becoming a writer, you know, there's a lot of hard work involved in that, especially if you are making a career change. And that's okay if you feel passionate about it. Like Georgeanne said, it's very worthwhile. The other bit of advice I'd have is don't be afraid of getting a lot of feedback, but remember, you don't have to take it all. And so I think that is, you're never going to please everybody, and you're never going to, there's always room for improvement. So I think that that's just something I've learned, is that get a lot of feedback, but you don't have to take it all.
Deborah?
I'm so pleased to be on this panel with women who exemplify all the things that we've seen here today in terms of leadership, in terms of embracing your creativity and doing the hard work on that side. I would have two points of advice. One, I talked about pipeline earlier, how long it takes for a book to go from the time it's your idea to getting it created, to getting it acquired and then made. It's several years. So it's easy to look and see what's the popular selling book right now. Look at the bestsellers and see this is what's selling. Everyone's buying graphic novels. I have to write a graphic novel. As Georgeanne said, you write what your passion is, because 2 years from now, that trend isn't going to be there, or not likely to, or stuff is already in the pipeline for it. You wait for what your moment is, because you're writing what your passion is. It's incredibly important to that, to be productive and stay with what is a long process. You know, you have to stay engaged the whole time. And the second half of that is we're writing and strategizing our careers right now in a particularly challenging and unusual time when there are many demands on our attention, on our creativity. The pressures and stress can do that. So be kind to yourself. That's as important to anybody. You look and see all these people getting books signed up, or they're getting their jobs in there. Understand that it's okay to take days off. It's okay to not be productive now, but to be productive later. Just being understanding. I think it's because it's a particularly unique moment in time, we have to acknowledge that self-care is important for creative people and for anyone. So I throw that in there as you're madly working on your projects, is to bring them to the fruition at the time that they come to fruition.
And I would say,
I'd like to add one more thing.
Sure.
I've had people come to me and say, I want to be a writer. And it's like, okay. But they haven't written anything. And I say, you've got to start somewhere. So start jotting notes on paper, put it in a folder, but you've got to do something. So I think my advice is to write, and don't worry about it being judged at this point. You just have to get started. And I've written a lot of books, but I am a great procrastinator. And I can tell you the ritual I go through, cleaning out the sock drawers and everything. I'm thinking while I'm doing it, but there's a lot of procrastination that can happen, and that's very normal. But the bottom line is, you can't just say you want to do it. You have to start, even if it's a baby step. You just have to start somewhere.
And that's a lot of what Anne Lamott talks about too, going bird by bird. Just start, just do it little by little, and then eventually it'll be done. And I know that the third or the fourth and final day of the San Diego Writers Festival is focused on craft. So, folks, come back and you'll get a lot of advice and examples on crafting. So I want to just, with this question, I want to focus more on the topic of this panel. And I would say, don't be afraid to interrupt the mansplaining. And again, I go back to make good trouble and make noise. And, I feel like we, and I know that Kathy, Deborah, and I've had conversations, but you're going to interact with a lot of mansplainers. And I would say, don't be afraid to show your expertise and show your knowledge, and, that we have a right and a responsibility to be here. And I think that's really important, and to not, let our power be diminished in that way. So I would say stay strong, girl power. And we have a support network. And that's kind of one of the last questions that I want to ask is with how can we support each other? We are as we're at different levels of our career. How can we support each other in the community of women? What are some tips and advice for that? Kathy and I want to come back to this question, but I'm hoping that this maybe piggybacks off it, but I also want to point out, Kathy has written many, many, many books about women. You have, and many of your topics are strong women: Sacagawea, Coretta Scott King, Frances, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Hillary Clinton, Victoria. There you go. Keep them coming. There's tons of books that Kathy's written about strong women. Why is that important to you?
Well, thank you. I'm so proud to be part of this panel. This is really an excellent panel, very inspiring. That's my way of helping, is to write a lot of books about women's histories. My favorite thing to do is writing about women's history for a number of reasons. One is that it's still so neglected. There's so many women's stories that have not been told. There's a lot of room to research and discover new stories and bring these people to kids today. It's my way of empowering young readers, especially girl readers, to think about their future, think big, think bold. What did these women have to do to accomplish what they did? And it's my way of fighting back of some of the problems that we've been talking about. So I actually have a whole series called Women Who Broke the Rules. And that's kind of says it all right there. Coretta Scott King, Sotomayor, Mary Todd Lincoln, Judy Blume broke the rules in writing, Sacagawea, dedicated to Virginia, Dolly Madison broke the rules for what first ladies were supposed to be. And all my women's history books have that in common. They're how did these particular women break the rules of the society of their time, not by breaking laws or being bad, but just breaking stupid rules that were holding them back in society. So that's where I feel like I can make my contribution.
Kathy,
and just real quick, sorry.
That's okay. I think the first book you and I worked on when I was an assistant editor was Lives of Extraordinary Women, which was a collection of stories about extraordinary women, indeed. And one of my favorite books to this day remains the Wilma Unlimited, the story of Wilma Rudolph and the fastest woman in the world. And to this day, that remains a favorite of mine. This was before I knew Kathy. I had decided that was a favorite.
And this book, every second grader in the world knows this book because it's in the textbook anthology. So Kathy's pretty famous without people knowing she's famous.
You guys, I didn't say you or anything.
But also, Kathy, can you share the anecdote? I always enjoy it with her "Women Who Broke the Rules" series. That wasn't your original title.
No, it was not. I wanted to call the series "Kick-Ass Women," and the publisher said, "No way. Are we going to let a series of books go out with ass in the title?" So it's too bad because that's what all these women are that I write about. They're kick-ass women. They know how to go out there, kick ass, make their mark, make their contribution, and that's what I want to celebrate.
Thank you. So we have, so that's Kathy's, the question is how we can support each other as a community of women KidLit writers. So Kathy has brought up how she, writes about kick-ass women and has a place for them. What are some other pieces of advice that the others on this panel have? How can we support each other? Georgeanne?
Oh, okay, I wasn't sure. For many years, I have been a member of a group called Writing Women, and it's interesting. We founded it, a couple of us, back in the 80s, and it's really a group of friends who are all authors, but we founded it to be able to share the business aspect of the writing industry and to support each other. And we had a Zoom meeting last night, and it's very loose, it's not like dues or anything like that. But as a group, we've been able to support each other over the years and introduce each other to agents and editors and that sort of thing. And what I was really proud about is there are 3 of the Writing Women from our group who are all best-selling authors, but who I was able to hire to write books for our adult sector for the zoo, and they're working on these books right now. They're very, very, very talented women, and they're great storytellers. And so I think because of the support group and getting to know each other, and I was able to pair somebody's talents with the topic at hand, and I felt that group, that loosely knit group, has been very invaluable to me, and they've helped me through very challenging times over the years. So I think connecting with each other is really a great way to start.
That is wonderful for so many reasons. And when you brought up 80s, I was just thinking, that's my favorite decade ever. Do you guys dress up in 80s clothes and have 80s music in the background? No?
I like 80s music and I like 70s, but I like 80s.
But no, that's great. And I think that's really important. What I love that you said was about the women support, having a women's group dedicated to that. And I think that's extremely important. And so I see that Jennifer's here, which means that our time is up. But thank you so much for being here with us. This was fantastic.